Welcome back to my channel, and in today's video I'm going to be doing something that I have never done before. I'm going to be revealing my first ever Dr. Paycheck that I got at 22. And I'm going to be sharing with you guys exactly how I spent it and how the habits that I built back then helped me grow a 6-figure investment portfolio by the age of 25. Okay guys, so I've got all of the information on my phone. My first junior doctor salary was £2,204 after all of the taxes were deducted. So in other words, that was my net. And my hourly rate as a junior doctor, fresh out of medical school, was £13.81. I've already created a video on how I feel about junior doctor salaries and just the truth behind being a junior doctor in the UK, and I will link that somewhere on the screen, but that is not the focus for right now. The focus is how did I budget £2,204. I'm gonna be so real. At that time, I hadn't seen that amount of money before, so I was like, oh my gosh, I'm a baller. I'm rich. And I always knew that I wanted to invest. It was really important for me back then to make sure that I was spending my money wisely. And so having that as a context, I then went on to look at my bank statement for that month just to see how financially conscious I was. As a Jesus girlie, the first transaction that came out was my tithe. For those of you who aren't familiar with that, it's basically when you take 10% of whatever you earn and you give it to God and you're like, thank you, sir. For me, it's God, I'm giving you back your 10% because I trust that you can do more with 90% than I could have done with 100%. Tithing for me is a non-negotiable. And then the next thing, as a finance girlie, as a finance nerd who has read so many finance books that tell you that you should pay yourself first, I don't know how I arrived at this number, but I took £1,200 and I invested it straight. It was gone. I didn't touch it. Literally left my account with the reference investing. I'm proud that my 22-year-old self was on it and was serious about putting money aside for future investments. So after we sorted out the tithe and we paid ourselves first, then came the bad boy expenses. So the biggest expense for me was rent. When I started working as a junior doctor, I didn't have the luxury of living at home. I actually moved to a different city and I rented out a 2-bed, 3-floored house, which is so extra considering that I worked a lot of nights and weekends and long days, and so I actually wasn't home very much. But anyway, I rented out this 3-floored, 2-bed, 2-bath house with another doctor. So all of the bills in total were £650, excluding Wi-Fi. And I'm going to be so honest, I left that house after 6 months. One thing that I didn't like was because bills were not included, when we entered into the winter months, it was so hard to predict how much the electricity and gas bill would be. And the UK can be really, really cold. I felt like the bills were fluctuating and it was very hard to know how much I was going to be able to put aside for investing. And putting money aside for investing was my #1 priority. And when the bills were starting to affect that, I said, bye honey. Then the next set of bills, all things transport, food, groceries, going out. And being a baby girl, I spent £407. And then I did something naughty. I actually dipped into my savings and took out £137, and it's not clear what I use this money for. I'm going to be so real, I do have a fundamental rule. If I've ever had to dip into my emergency fund for non-emergency reasons, when money is next given to me, that amount has to be replaced. So I did actually check to see if I had this rule back then, and I did. So the £137 that I took out, I actually put the £137 back in the next month. So if we look at that, I was able to save 54% of my income. Remember, I instantly put aside £1,200 and my income was £2,204. So when you put that as a fraction and multiply by 100, you get 54%. And I don't know what the average savings rate is, but I thought that that was quite decent considering that that was my first paycheck. There are a number of things that I did differently to increase my saving percentage. So the first thing, which I touched on earlier, was I moved house. So I stayed in that lovely house for 6 months, and then I moved into a house share that was 10 minutes away from my work, and all bills included was £400 a month. The second thing that I did was I made sure that everywhere I lived afterwards was super close to where I worked. Reason being, I heard my friends who lived far from the hospital complaining about how much they were spending on petrol, and I just didn't want that to be the case. So I never lived more than 10 minutes away from work, and I actually was able to keep my transport for expenses relatively low. I couldn't get it lower than 80. And on this channel, we keep things real. I'm gonna be so honest, I definitely cried for like 3 days straight when I moved house, because I went from being in a house that was massive, open plan kitchen, living setup, to being in a house with 4 other people who I didn't know. Thank God I had good flatmates, but who I didn't know, in like a tiny room in comparison to my previous room. But one thing that helped me get through it was it's not gonna be forever, and it wasn't forever. I only stayed there for 6 months, and then it was the end of my first year as a doctor. The aim of the game is delayed gratification. When you have a big goal, when you have a big target, you will need to make sacrifices. I'm not gonna sit here and say that I didn't make sacrifices. No, in order to save more, to be able to hit my finance investment targets, I needed to increase how much I was saving before I had the understanding and the revelation of actually I need to just increase my income as well, and that can ramp up my savings rate. So yes guys, that is it. That was my first paycheck as a junior doctor. That is how much I spent on the different segments of my life, and it's those money habits and the fact that I always paid myself first and made sure that my saving percentage was not less than 50%, and I always tried to optimize for ways that I could increase my savings rate so that I could hit my investment goals faster, even if that meant making sacrifices. So I hope that has given you a bit more insight into my journey on how I've been able to get to the position that I am today. Let me know your thoughts in the comment, and don't forget to check out the description boxes. I'm going to put some personal finance bits and bobs in there for you guys to check out. Otherwise, I will see you in my next video. Bye.